Good evening and welcome to another edition of The Law and You. My name is Stuart Fahmy and I'm very happy to have you with us tonight because tonight you are in for a treat. Instead of the usual one guest, we have two very prominent attorneys in town. First, Mr. Thomas Schneck. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
For those of you who have watched the show before, Tom has been a frequent guest on the show, and as you know, he's an intellectual property lawyer. He's been practicing for 44 years and is currently volunteering with the CARA program, which he's going to tell us about. He's an adjunct professor at San Jose State University and teaching business in business school, and he's also teaching intellectual property and religious freedom at Lincoln University Law School in San Jose. Our second guest, the distinguished Yemi Getachew. Yemi is a specialist in immigration law. She practices a very, very important topic these days, asylum. She is a part of the AILA, American Immigration Lawyers Association. She is the upcoming chairperson of that group. She is on the executive committee, and she's also the liaison between the INS and the asylum attorneys in town, and she comes to us with a wealth of experience in immigration, and she'll tell us a lot about asylum. And let me start with her, and then we will segue to Mr. Schneck. Good evening and welcome to the show. Happy to have you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're from and what made you start practicing immigration and asylum, and then we'll delve into some questions.
Okay. My name is Yemi Getachew, as I said, and I am also an immigrant. I'm originally from Ethiopia, and I came to the United States perhaps in the late 80s, and amidst a lot of turmoil that was going on in my own native land, and had already completed law school in Ethiopia when I was very young. And after I came here, I believe in 1995, I decided, well, I think it's time, and I decided to take the California bar exam. And I did, and after that I wondered, what is the best way, seeing my own background, my own experience, what is the most effective way of being able to engage in the legal community. So I chose the area of immigration law. I opened my practice in 1996, and I've done, 1,500 asylum cases over the years, and kind of really honed my skills in that area.
Tell us a little bit about the asylum. Who is generally eligible for asylum? Is it certain countries or certain areas? Explain to our viewers what is asylum and when is one qualified to obtain asylum under our immigration laws.
That's a very good question, and one that if you hear a lot of TV, a lot of pundits, a lot of people try and explain, usually they don't tell you what is the accurate information under our laws. Basically, in order to seek asylum, you must be physically present here in the United States, and you must have either left your country of origin or country of last residence because you were persecuted. And the persecutor is either going to be the government, or it's going to be like forces the government cannot or will not control. Family groups, tribes, ethnic groups, gangs sometimes, certain identifiable groups that persecute people. Now, not only that, but this persecution, this harm that you experienced must be on account of 5 enumerated grounds. It has to be either because of your race, your nationality, your religion, your membership in a particular social group, or your political opinion. And not only that, but you have to apply within 1 year of being physically present here in the United States. And if you don't, you are barred unless there was some reason, a grave reason why you were not able to file for asylum.
Well, I was just going to ask you, how would one come into the United States to start with if he or she has an asylum case? Do they have to come under a special visa, or any kind of visa that allow them to be present here would qualify them to seek asylum?
So there's no...
Assuming that these 5, one of these 5 categories is applicable.
Right. So the law understands that people make it here under different ways and different circumstances. There's a person who may have even obtained documents that were not real, or a person who presents themselves at a border or at a checkpoint, or a person who actually comes into the United States, say, as a visitor on a visitor's visa, but then knows that they can no longer return to their country safely. So no matter how you came, you can apply for asylum. It is the only protection where how you came into the United States does not preclude you from being able to file.
Okay. Now, we talked a little bit before the program about the CARA program. Tell us a little bit about it, and then maybe we can ask Tom as to, I understand he's a volunteer with the CARA program, and then we'll ask him his opinion on what he does exactly. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about the CARA program, please.
Thank you. I believe sometime in 2014, I'm sure people have heard over the airwaves and so on, that there was a large influx of Central American families that were fleeing from their countries, specifically about 3 countries. And they came and they presented themselves at the border. And at the border, these people were actually fleeing persecution, things that were happening to them for a variety of reasons. Some of them were fleeing really terrible domestic violence. Some of them, gangs had completely taken over their areas, and they were not able to conduct businesses, and they were killing family members, and they were forcibly recruiting their children into gangs. There are a variety of reasons that these women and children and men as well courageously would just leave their places of origin and just come through and present themselves at the Mexican border. And there was such a large influx. There was a big hue and cry, and the administration, in response to that, decided that they would try to make an example out of these families so that others will not be encouraged to come. And so one of the things that they did was they started these detention centers. There was a detention center in New Mexico, and then there's another one in Dilley, and that's the one that Tom is going to talk about.
In which? In where?
In Dilley, Texas.
Oh, okay.
And it's in
Never heard of it.
Never. You cannot. It actually is kind of at the end of Twilight Zone, so to speak. And they put them in these detention facilities to hold them in there, where it's like a baby jail. That really is what it is. And so from the time that they come in, where they present themselves at the border and have an interview, a conversation with a border patrol, to the time then they're forced into these detention centers where they have to articulate a reason for why they left their native countries and why they're unwilling to come back. A lot of problems started happening. And what the idea was that they'd put them in there and then they'd just ship them back. But then 4 courageous organizations got together and started the CARA project, and all of a sudden this ignited an interest in a lot of immigration lawyers everywhere, where people would volunteer like their time and energy and money and volunteer for weeks at a time sometimes to go in and do the work that was necessary. And then there's a firm, Stephen Manning, that started something called the Innovation Law Lab that gave us the technology to actually be able to keep up with a client's case as they go through the process. And so once they were successful in getting the credible fear and then they were released, wherever they would go, wherever the relatives are, then attorneys on the ground would represent them and actually present their asylum cases to immigration court.
Okay, before I get to Tom, I have 3 curiosity questions. One, you said 3 countries. What are these 3 countries?
So Honduras, El Salvador, and I believe
Guatemala
is the 3rd one.
That's what I thought. Okay, and these citizens of these 3 countries, how would they cross Mexico to get to our border? I mean, I'm assuming that Mexico act as a barrier between these Central American countries and the United States borders. How would they get into Mexico to start with? And why wouldn't Mexico take them rather than the United States?
Tough.
What is tough?
Tough. The journey is tough and horrendous.
But how did they get in? And
the
again,
women would tell you, smugglers.
Okay.
So smugglers, and the smugglers take advantage of these women. There's a lot of reports of, rape and things that happen to them, and extortion.
Sex trade, all of that stuff.
All of that stuff. Anything that you can imagine that is horrible is how it's part of the journey.
I'm still not clear, and I don't think anyone is, as to how did they cross all of Mexico, getting to our borders. And frankly speaking, why doesn't Mexico take them in and in lieu of or instead of the United States? I'm not suggesting that they can't come in here, but I'm just wondering, that's probably one of the political questions that would be asked by a Donald Trump or someone like that.
Except that Mexico has the very same problems. It's all a pipeline. It's all connected.
Okay.
The same problems, the drugs, the domestic violence, the gang-based activities that are forcing them to flee
that's a good point.
is all connected throughout Mexico. And
So
there's
if they
no
have problem in
safety.
their country, they'll probably have it
Exactly.
in Mexico. All right,
Exactly.
now let's move on to Mr. The only one I know of by the name of Mr. Tom Schneck. Tom, I understand you are a volunteer with CARA. Tell us how you are involved with them.
Well, Stuart, I heard about the CARA project about 2 years ago, and I couldn't believe what I heard. So I started investigating it, and I took a couple of CLE classes, continuing legal education on immigration law, to find out if this was for real and what's happening with asylum law. And I couldn't believe that our government is putting women and babies in detention, and that's why Yemi referred to this as baby jail. Can you imagine our government putting babies and young kids in jail? Well, that's what's happening, hard to believe. And you read about the refugee crisis in Syria and Europe. You hear about that all the time in the media, but you don't hear about the crisis that's right here on our borders, except once in a while a politician mentions that we have to build walls and so on. So
Whoever mentioned that?
no names, please. So I got interested in the project. I volunteered, and I took my granddaughter in February. She's a graduate of UCLA and speaks Spanish. I took her to Dili to work for a week, and it was so compelling that I'm going again next week. It's so it's one of the most compelling things that I've done in the field of pro bono. I've done criminal pro bono, representing people in San Quentin and Folsom and elsewhere. And this has similarity, except we're dealing with people that are innocent. These are babies. These are women who have been terrorized.
Okay. So you're going to Delhi, you're going to these detention centers, and you said it's a baby jail. I'm assuming some, because a lot of the detainees, if you want, are children, correct?
Correct.
What exactly do you do to help them out?
Well, they're entitled, and they're there for an asylum hearing before an asylum officer. And the asylum officer will decide whether there is credible fear, whether their story has the ring of truth to it. So we prepare them for that interview, which is going to last maybe 2 hours, hour to 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours. We prepare them for what they might expect in the way that we would prepare a client for a deposition. We tell them to speak slowly, to tell the truth, always the truth, that if they don't understand the question, to stop, ask the officer to repeat the question, instructions like that. We cannot object to questions. We accompany the client to the hearing before the asylum officer, but we cannot interrupt and object the way you do in court. We have to sit there and listen, and then after it's over, we can come back and ask the asylum officer maybe to repeat a question or redirect it or explore some area which didn't come out, so that a credible fear is expressed by the client.
And I'm assuming you speak Spanish?
Sufficiently to, I wish it were better, but sufficiently to communicate, to tell the client, to answer the question, to tell the truth, etc.
So you don't have an interpreter then?
I do not use an interpreter. At the hearing itself, the asylum officer has an interpreter.
Okay. So your role basically is somewhat of a guidance and preparation for this asylum officer.
Yes.
Questioning these detainees, I guess, for lack of a better word. What is your success rate?
The project's success rate is fairly high. I would say it's above 90%. And I think that without attorneys, it's not as much. But in fact, I've heard that it's rather low without attorneys. But with attorneys, there's a fairly high success rate.
How many detainees are there at the
Right
Delhi
now, it
jail?
varies. It varies from 500 to 2,000. At the present moment, there's about 1,200.
Okay, and so there is a constant flow of these folks coming into these detaining centers?
Yes, and as soon as they receive their hearing, if they're successful, they're entitled to parole.
Okay.
If they're not successful, they're entitled to one last hearing before an immigration judge, and if they're not successful, they're deported.
And they go back to Mexico, or to?
Well, they're left at, some of them are left at the border. Some of them are left at the border. Some.
And so they make their own trip back. Chances are they'll probably try to come in again.
Well, I don't know. Some of them do. Some of them try a second time. Yes.
And this actually, now let's be political for a minute here. One of the issues that I am actually an independent. I am neither a Democrat nor a Republican. I'm very concerned about these kind of people. I mean, these kind of problems that young people and children have. But in the meantime, looking at it from the other side here, as I indicated earlier, why can't Mexico? And you answered the question rather eloquently. But I would, as a politician, I would be concerned about this constant flow of immigrants coming into, or not immigrants, but illegal aliens coming into the country, because I mean, with the economy the way it is, and being, having the problem. I mean, that is a problem, don't you think?
No, Stuart, our country is a country of immigrants. You know that.
Right. And I'm an immigrant myself.
And everybody. I mean, you go back.
We're all immigrants.
We're
That's
all
not
immigrants.
the point, Tom. I mean, but I came in with proper papers. I applied. I stood in line. It took me 5 years. My brothers and sisters took them 16 years to come in here. So, I mean, I stood in line, basically. And I am all for immigrants. I mean, absolutely. The problem is having an uncontrolled immigration whereby people come in here that maybe are not supposed to be here.
Yeah, we're not talking about uncontrolled. Go ahead.
Yeah, part of it is that these are asylum seekers.
Okay.
And we are signatories to treaties, and we have asylum laws.
Okay.
These people are not breaking the law. They're actually presenting
within
themselves.
the law.
They are just as legal as a person who's applying for a visa. Their intent is very clear. And the immigration law, the asylum law that I described at the beginning, is the law that is on the books. It's not something else. They're not trying to sneak in. Now, when you have a fear for your life, you got a fear for your life.
I have a fear of my life.
It's not. When I went to Delhi and volunteered, one of the things that I always look at, and I go, because I have a daughter, and I wonder at how much courage it takes to put a baby on your back and a baby on your side and brave the treacherous path, because for them, it's survival.
It is.
When you're facing death, when you're facing certain death like that, it stops being political. It stops being about, they're coming in, they're going out. It stops being like that. They're actually, we have laws. We are the United States of America. We actually have a welcome sign for those that work hard. Now, here's the biggest thing, and I think the thing that people need to know. Because I told you, I've done over 1,500 asylum cases successfully. And I love when I see a lot of my clients are, doctors and lawyers and businessmen, and they kind of go back. I love it. I always say I've produced at least 6 attorneys who followed in my footsteps.
We don't need any more attorneys.
That's what they all say.
At this point in time, my love to you has diminished significantly. No, I'm just being funny.
But how about doctors? Good. But
Yeah.
not only that, but I think it's kind of like, to me, when I look at them, the resourcefulness and the courage that it took is that same courage that we talk about that makes you successful in America. Because they're not the ones that are going to come and do X, Y, Z. They're actually the ones that are going to add to the tapestry of the United States of America.
I want to be very clear. I totally agree with you, but I have to play the devil's advocate here, okay? And the devil's advocate is going to say, isn't that also some sort of a signature for poor people that may not have faced fear or anything else other than just economical poverty and are seeking some sort of economical advantage by coming to the United States, the land of opportunity, and therefore we are accepting them, and some of them become lawyers and some become, but at the same time they did not stand in line like all of us did, and therefore that is something that is unacceptable. That's just one argument. The second argument is going to be, why don't other countries participate with us? Why do we have to accept all people with all problems? And in fact, how many of them have we properly vetted and make sure that this fear is real, that this persecution is actual, and that they are not coming that, stating that just for the sole purpose to come into the country? Having said all of that, I would agree with you that possibly 90% or more of these people are legitimately entitled to at least an asylum case. Protection. But I have to tell you that some politicians are going to say what I just said.
I would just very quickly say three things to that.
You can be slow.
The first thing is immigration reform, right? We should have a way to distinguish that.
That's
the
right.
people that are economic refugees cannot benefit under our asylum laws as they exist today, because the 5 enumerated grounds do not include economic poverty. So there should be, if there are work programs, I mean, that's why we talk about comprehensive immigration reform. That's why we talk about, providing pathways for people who want to come in and work to be able to do that. That's something completely different. The other thing that that you mentioned is security. And since I
that's
see
a huge topic.
It's a huge topic, and our responsibility as a nation. We are the United States of America, but when you look at the number of people that we're currently accepting as refugees in comparison with like much smaller countries in Europe, it doesn't pale in comparison.
Or with Canada.
Or Canada.
Canada accepts more refugees.
But no other country has faced the violence and the terrorism threats that we are having right now. I mean, we just heard about what happened in Orlando. We just heard, and that creates this fear.
But that was not an immigrant. But the Orlando was not.
But try to explain that to the average American, because even though this person that, I don't want to mention his name, even though I know it, that killed the 50 people in Orlando, is actually born in New York,
Queens, and
Sure.
his parents emigrated in the 80s.
And so, but he somehow became radicalized and became who he has been, and I don't know what his problem was. I mean, my point is, by the way, most of these people have some sort of mental problem.
Absolutely.
There's no question, because no one that in his own mind will dare do it. But anyway,
and we can blame anybody we want for any reason at any time,
That's
right? I mean, we can say, I can, whenever I get upset, I could say, hey, the KKK made me do it. But
and one more point I want to make: I did not agree with George W. Bush with a lot of his policies, but there was one policy that I really thought. He never won it, unfortunately, but when he came up with the idea of giving work visas to all of the south of the border people coming in to work here and giving them a work permit to come in and then go back, that was a great idea, but it didn't fly.
Sensible immigration
Very sensible
policies.
I agree with you. What else would you add, both of you? This is we have about 4.5 minutes left in the program. If you were to be the decider, I want to use another word of George W. Bush, of what the immigration reform would look like, what would be the top 3 or 4 issues that you would tackle? Tom?
Well, before we get to that, I just wanted to go back a bit and tell you what a typical immigration story might be so that you understand the situation.
I understand it, but tell the viewers.
So a typical story that I heard last time when I was in Dili is a woman with her child might be alone in a Central American country, say El Salvador, and let's say she's a domestic working by herself, no man in her life. She's working by herself, and the gang comes by, and they tell her that they want $20 a week protection money, and this is typical. This is not unusual. So she has to agree to pay the $20 a month or $20 a week protection money. And then they say that they won't hurt her child. Now, what happens is that she may lose her job, she can't pay, and so she flees, comes to the border, and those are the kind of people that we see. They're terrorized by these gangs.
Okay. Tom, I apologize, but I do need to say your phone number and Yemi's phone number. If you're interested in talking to Yemi about an asylum case, give her a call at 408-292-7995.
That's correct.
And Tom, if you're interested in working in CARA or either of them and volunteering, please call them at 408-297-9733. Tom Schneck, Yemi Getachew, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing it. Okay, tell me, now, Tom did not answer my question. I'd like you, we have 2 minutes to answer my question.
My question is sensible immigration reform.
Okay, what does that mean?
Sensible means one that is going to help America and it's going to be fair across the board. Right. One of the things is for the 11 million that are here already, let's give them a pathway to meaningful change and status here in the United States.
All right.
Let's give them an opportunity to earn it. We've had things like paying money as a fine, okay, going to the back of the line, some of the things that have been proposed. And there used to be something called like suspension of deportation, where if you've stayed in the United States for a long period of time, if you prove you're a person of good moral character, and if you prove that hardship to you is going to result, then you should be able to cancel your deportation and remain in the United States. Those are some things that we can do. We did not talk about some burning issues like unaccompanied minors that come and present themselves to the border. That's going to be a big issue as well. But what it is
how
that...
do they come in? How do they come in?
Same thing, they're asylum seekers because they're fleeing the gang violence. So these are big issues that we need to tackle together.
I have a request of you. Would you come back and talk about these issues? We don't have enough time to cover all of these issues, and these issues are extremely important, especially in this political year that we're having here, 2016. Tom, I want to thank you so much for coming in today and talking to us. And by the way, I agree with all of your ideas, and I didn't mean to sound like I'm tough or anything. Yemi, it's a pleasure having you here.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for watching us. Stuart Fahmy, call me at 408-666-0000 with any suggestions. Good night. We'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.